running. You're watching Fox Friends First here on a Monday morning. I'm Todd Pyro.
And I'm Ashley Strohmeyer in for Carly Shimkus. Things appear to be going from bad to worse for Democrats. This is the outcome of President Biden's policies speak for themselves. So would the party actually benefit from Biden bowing out?
If you support Joe Biden, you have to support and defend the policies of Joe Biden, which is really bad for Democrats electorally. If you throw Joe Biden over the bus, right, or off the ship, then he's a lame duck president and there's 2 years left in the presidency. So they're in this quandary. You're not going to get different policies with a different presidential candidate. Joe Biden could be fine. Joe Biden could save his presidency if he would change course.
Brooke Singman has more on the state of play between the media and the White House. Brooke, good morning.
Hey, good morning, guys. The White House is continuing to brush off bad polls as support for President Biden continues to slide. Last week, the president's approval rating hitting a new low. A new Quinnipiac University poll showing just 31% approve and 60% disapprove. But yesterday, White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain argued it's not the president's fault. Listen to this.
I think the president's approval rating is kind of a reflection of how people feel about what's going on in the country. And some things in our country aren't going well, not because of what the president did, but in fact because of what the president's fighting against.
But headlines like these highlighting the president's plummeting poll numbers are hard to brush off. NPR pointing out how a growing number of Democrats are souring on President Biden. And a Washington Post op-ed goes even further, calling on the president to quit now and save the midterms with a one-term pledge, writing, quote, unless Biden announces that he is not running for re-election, this quiet campaign against him will intensify, whether it comes from people who intend to challenge Biden in the primaries in 2024 or just to flex their muscles to discourage him from running again. And in Ohio, Democratic Congressman Tim Ryan, who is running for Senate, is reportedly dodging public appearances with the president. Earlier this month, he didn't appear at Biden's address to union workers in Cleveland, even though several other notable Ohio Democrats were there. Ryan is also calling on Democrats to do more to reduce soaring prices, as the latest polling shows Americans say inflation is their #1 concern heading into the midterms in November. Carly, Ashley. I'm sorry, Todd. Actually.
Yeah, watching, don't worry about it. Watching Tim Ryan
Carly.
dodge is almost been hysterical.
You're great, Todd.
Carly, we do miss Carly, but we have Ashley and we have Brooke, and now we have this, a Fox News exclusive. Former President Trump absolutely dominating in the 2024 GOP presidential nomination straw poll at this weekend's Turning Point USA Student Action Summit. A whopping 78.7% of attendees saying they'd like to see Trump at the top of the ticket in the next election. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis coming in at a distant second with 19%. Meantime, attendees say California Governor Gavin Newsom would be the most difficult Democratic candidate for a Republican to beat in 2024. Michelle Obama taking second place with over 13% of the vote. Steve Hilton argues that Newsom is the wrong choice for the White House.
What could we expect from him? He closed California public schools earlier and for longer than anyone else. Just under half the kids in California meet the state's standards for English. Half. With math, it's even fairer. A third of the kids are proficient in math, 2/3 aren't, and that is great because as California Democrats have established, math is racist. You don't want kids learning that stuff. Now, we say that all this woke madness actually hurts black kids the most, but that's just a narrative. Gavin has the facts. There is definitely one area where California is leading the nation. Illiteracy. Isn't that the kind of transformative leadership America needs? Look, I love California. I'm not leaving. I'm staying to fight for change. But take it from someone who lives here. These policies, these far-left extremist policies pushed by Gavin Newsom and the California Democrats, that is the last thing America needs.
President Biden is still feeling the effects of COVID-19, but his health is said to be getting better by the day. A Sunday update from the White House doctor says, quote, his symptoms continue to improve significantly. His predominant symptom is now a sore throat. We will continue to monitor him closely. Meanwhile, the administration's coronavirus response coordinator says none of the 17 people Biden came in contact with, or at least close contact with, recently have contracted the virus. The White House is downplaying concerns about an economic downturn.
Yeah, but some experts are sounding the recession alarm ahead of a key report that could show a second straight quarter of negative GDP growth. Doug Luzader live for us in Washington with more. Doug.
Good morning. We have a slew of economic news coming out this week, and it's clear the White House expects that Thursday's GDP numbers are going to be pretty bad, indicating perhaps a consecutive quarter of decline. And while that may be the rule of thumb for signaling a recession, 2 quarters in a row of negative economic growth, the president's economic advisors say no. In a blog, they write this: while some maintain that 2 consecutive quarters of falling real GDP constitute a recession, that is neither the official definition nor the way economists evaluate the state of the business cycle. A former Obama economic advisor, Larry Summers, though, sees a recession on the way.
I think there's a very high likelihood of recession when we've been in this kind of situation before. Recession has essentially always followed when inflation has been high and unemployment has been low.
Well, we also have the Fed meeting this week, and they're widely expected to hike interest rates to battle soaring inflation. You see it there, 9.1%, something the White House says is a top concern.
Inflation is way too high. The Fed is charged with putting in place policies that will bring inflation down, and I expect them to be successful.
We'll see. Republicans say it is time for a reset.
You cannot tax your way out of inflation. You cannot tax your way to prosperity. And they also know the best way to see an economic recovery is to lower those taxes.
Okay, and in addition to GDP numbers and the Fed meeting this week, we'll also get a look at the Consumer Confidence Index on Tuesday, tomorrow. Back to you guys.
Okay, Doug Luzader live for us. Thanks, Doug.
Thanks.
A group of House Republicans are touring the border in Eagle Pass, Texas today, a community that's become a flashpoint in the ongoing migrant crisis. Congressman Tony Gonzalez will lead the delegation just days after Homeland Security Secretary Andrew Mayorkas once again claimed the border is secure. Listen.
It's the furthest thing from secure. I represent 42% of the southern border. There's certainly nobody in my district that thinks it's secure. We can't wait on the administration to fix our problems. Congress is an equal body of government, and we got to roll up our sleeves.
So far this year, Border Patrol agents have encountered over 2 million migrants crossing the border illegally. That's already more than all of last fiscal year. And did you hear about this? Lawmakers are warning Americans not to share their DNA with popular online testing services over fears it can be used to develop potential bioweapons. Take a listen.
You can actually take someone's DNA, take their medical profile, and you can target a biological weapon that will kill that person. And people will very rapidly spit into a cup and send it into 23andMe and get really interesting data about their background. And guess what? Their DNA is now owned by a private company and can be sold off.
Corey Mills is a Florida congressional candidate, former DOD advisor under President Trump, and Army combat veteran. Corey, how worried should we be about this?
Well, Todd, I think we should be very worried. I mean, we have to think about the fact of how cavalier we are with sharing our DNA, understanding our bio strands, looking at how we can create biological weapons that would be protein attachments that could actually kill off individuals. I mean, this could be something that is used against military, and especially as millions upon millions of people utilize things like the 23andMe. We need to bear in mind that there can be certain types of viruses, very similar to what they were working with in the Wuhan virus in China, that could directly target Americans. But not only Americans, we need to be thinking about livestock. We need to be thinking about the fact that they could also create biological weapons to impact our animals and our livestock to try and eliminate a lot of them, like we saw in Kansas, where there were thousands upon thousands of livestock that had died off from the heat. But we could see the very same thing to try and create food shortages, which Senator Joni Ernst had talked about ad nauseum.
Corey, 23andMe was founded in 2016, and then something similar, Ancestry.com, that was created way back in 1983. That's well over 30 years. That's millions and millions of people just willingly giving up this DNA. But when I hear Congress talking about the potential for this, to me, that makes it seem like they've already seen it happen. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you something. We have all these things where we're so curious or so careful about protecting our name ID, protecting LifeLock for our Social Security numbers. And I think that, again, we played very cavalier when it comes to our DNA and how weapons can be utilized from a biological perspective to actually target Americans. So I think there needs to be legislation that more closely restricts the sharing or the selling of our DNA to foreign countries where they could actually create something like this.
What's the end game of those who wish to create a bioweapon with this? I mean, point blank, is it to eliminate Americans?
Well, it could be to eliminate Americans. It could be to try and make a lot of those in the military sick enough to where we would have an inability for readiness. I mean, there are many applications that you could look at. Could be, as I was talking about earlier, to impact food and livestock quantities. There's a lot of applications when you talk about biological warfare, Todd.
And then, Corey, let's get to this topic now. Experts are now saying Hunter Biden almost certainly broke foreign lobbying laws for failing to register under the Federal Foreign Agents Registration Act during his years of doing business overseas. I want to read this. It's George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley. He told the New York Post, quote, "In the last few weeks, the compelling basis for a FARA charge has become unassailable and undeniable." What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the bottom line is that we know Hunter Biden, when you look at what was found on his laptop at the computer shop in Delaware that they've had for years now at DOJ, but have refused to actually investigate, that he had business dealings when it came to Burisma. He was making $83,000 out of Ukrainians in Burisma. We know that his father utilized the quid pro Joe and went in there and threatened not to give money to Ukraine if they basically went forward with these investigations. We know he had business dealings with the investment banks in China that are state-owned banks. We know that he presented the former president of Colombia to his father. We know that this Biden crime family has continued to go unfettered in their violations of FARA, the 1938 Act, but yet it's never been actually prosecuted. If this was the Trump family, if this was a Republican, you would see far greater consequences. And when I'm in Congress, I hope to join Congressman Jim Jordan and others to investigate this so we can stop the two-tiered elitist politician justice system and once and for all stop the Biden crime family.
But Corey, to that point, will Hunter Biden end up behind bars for any of this?
Not under the Democrat administration. As long as the Democrats are in charge, they're going to go with faux sham J6 unselect committees or other investigations, but not actually investigate their own. Again, we have a two-tiered elitist justice system where the American people would be thrown under the bus for similar acts, but this guy can go out and try to raise money for the prince and princess of Serbia or Yugoslavia, or try and leverage money for his company, the Rosemont Seneca, raising $28 million from the brother of the Emir of Qatar. I mean, again, all of these things are a direct violation of the FARA Act, which you won't see any action by the Democrat Party. But when we take the House back in 2022, you can guarantee that the following year in 2023, we will hold these investigations and we will get James, Joe, and even 10% for the big guy in our investigation committees.
Do you think all of this is going to wrap up before the midterms happen in November?
No, I don't. I don't think that any of this is going to take place. Again, they've had these computers for over 2 years since it came out of the computer shop in Delaware. And you see on there where there are tremendous amounts of correspondence. Even his former partner, Bobulinski, has testified that Joe Biden did know about his business dealings. We know recently that Joe Biden had claimed he didn't talk to his son about business dealings, but that had in fact happened. So this isn't going to happen under the Democrat administration. They're too busy looking at political imprisonment of J6 and not enough at the real crime that's going on, which is what's happening with Hunter Biden himself.
Corey Mills, always a pleasure to have you on, sir. You always tell it like it is. Sometimes it's stuff we don't want to hear, but it's stuff we need to hear. Corey Mills, thank you, sir.
Thanks, Todd.
If you thought you heard it all, just take a listen to this.
Climate deniers are really in some ways similar to all of those almost 400 law enforcement officers in Uvalde, Texas, who were waiting outside.
You're not just sleepy on a Monday morning. He really said that. We have the absolutely shocking comparison. That's landed Al Gore in hot water.
And LA County DA George Gascon's policies let convicted criminals back on the streets, but do not expect him to look in the mirror when it comes to crime, even as a convicted congressman. And gubernatorial candidate Lee Zeldin is speaking out in his first interview since his accused attacker was indicted by the feds.
And the Republican is getting an extra layer of security while he's out on the campaign trail, courtesy of the NYPD. Marianne Rafferty live for us with the latest. Marianne.
Well, good morning, guys. Zeldin had predicted the man who tried to stab him at a campaign event would be freed within hours of his felony arrest, and he was let go without bail. But 43-year-old David Jacobonis has now been arrested again, this time on a serious federal charge, which could land him up to 10 years in prison. He's being held until his next hearing. That's scheduled for Wednesday. Zeldin speaking to Fox for the first time since the indictment.
This person can attempt to stab anyone, let alone a member of Congress at a campaign event running for governor, and be released within hours. It required the feds to step up and to charge this person. This federal charge that he's facing is because I am a member of Congress. And if I wasn't a member of Congress, he would have been instantly released, and he'd still be on the streets right now.
Zeldin gained some muscle in the form of protection from New York's finest at last night's campaign event in Queens. A law enforcement official telling the New York Post that undercover operatives and plainclothes cops were deployed to the Republicans' rally. But Suffolk County PBA president says this all could have been avoided if law and order were prioritized by New York's liberal leaders.
It's bad policies, bad laws passed by bad politicians. We just had what certainly looked like an assassination attempt to me on Congressman Lee Zeldin. And that person who attempted to assassinate a sitting congressman walked out the door. And if not for the federal charges, would still be free.
And Jacobonis, an Iraq war vet, told officials he was drinking the day of the attack and doesn't remember what happened. He also claimed he didn't know who Zeldin was. Back to you guys.
Marianne, thank you very much. Liberal District Attorney George Gascon getting ripped as totally out of touch for taking this victory lap. Quote, "Thank you, California Governor Newsom, for signing several important bills to protect Californians from gun violence, including 4 bills supported by my office. Easy accessibility of firearms and ammunition has compounded this nation's gun violence crisis." But some say Gascon's policies are to blame for violence as more and more violent criminals are released back on the streets, including this career criminal who was convicted of killing Louis Amala back in 2015. The killer serving, get this, just 6 years of a 50-year prison sentence and was just rearrested on gun and DUI charges after a car chase. Shocker of shockers. Kathy Caddy, California attorney representing Amela's family, joins me now. Kathy, let's start with the gun part of this. What's the point of more gun control if Gascon's not going to enforce the laws that are already on the books?
Well, what you said is exactly correct. And, you know, there are several gun laws right now that he will not enforce, that he, in fact, has ordered his prosecutors to not file. He won't file many gun allegations at all, and he certainly won't file the most serious ones that would really, you know, make sure that gang members and drug dealers, that they felt like there might be consequences if they used a gun. So he needs to start by actually enforcing the laws that he took an oath to uphold. He's not a legislator. He is, in fact, the district attorney, and he needs to start actually enforcing the laws that he took an oath to uphold.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see that happen anytime soon. Now let's get to the facts of the case. I misrepresented the picture that was up on the screen. That actually was, in fact, your client, and I apologize for that. That was Mr. Amela, who was unfortunately, sadly, gunned down by a reputed gang member. The reputed gang member's name is Andrew Kacha. He got out of prison not just a few years earlier, but decades earlier, serving only 6 out of a possible 50-year prison sentence. How was this guy let out?
Well, it's really absolutely outrageous. So Mr. Kachu is one of, unfortunately, dozens of people who committed a murder or murders, and in this situation it was a gang murder with a gun. during the course of a robbery, and he was convicted by a jury, but the law changed, and so he needed to come back for there to be something called a transfer hearing done, which essentially was to look at whether or not he should go to juvenile court since he was 17 when he committed the murder, or go back up to adult court. And the appropriate thing to do would have been to do the hearing and send him back to adult court so that he could finish his sentence. But unfortunately, the district attorney's ridiculous and dangerous policy, which he calls his youth justice policy, does not allow for prosecutors to transfer the people who were under 18 when they committed these murders back up to criminal court. So Mr. Kachu, as well as many others, were released after having served only a handful of years on several decades of a sentence. And what that meant is that they were put back into the community with no programs, no help, no anything, and with there being no determination that they were safe to be in the community, and of course, in this situation, Mr. Kachu is not. So, as you said, he got arrested recently and led law enforcement on a very high-speed pursuit. And when he finally crashed, they found the gun that they had seen earlier, and as well as quite a number of drugs, and he was under the influence. So he's clearly a danger to the community. But there's another person who was equally released, a similar situation, who's now gone on to murder again. So his policies, Gascon's policies of never allowing for someone who is under 18 to be treated as an adult is really dangerous to public safety, and it's horrific for crime victims. And I can tell you that Mr. Amella's family is really devastated by Mr. Gascon's actions.
I mean, how could they not be? Look, I understand the whole purpose of juvenile. I was a third-year law student there at Pasadena Juvie, where the goal was rehabilitation for minor offenders. But we're talking somebody who stole a candy bar when they were 17, not somebody who took another life. If you take another life, I don't care what age it is, you need to be punished. It needs to be a deterrence, and you can't be let out after 6 years thinking everything's fine. My question for you, Kathy, who are the people that still think this guy, George Gascon, is a good guy for L.A.? Who are these people who aren't signing the recall petition?
Well, I think that there are some people who, for whatever reason, they just have not been following, the uptick in crime, because, as you may know, we've been having an incredible uptick in crime, both in murders as well as a number of other assaults, as well as robberies, and so on and so forth. And so for many people, if they do watch the news, hopefully they make the connection that the uptick in crime is largely because of Gascon's policies and him not holding criminals accountable, and essentially, empowering and emboldening them. And that is definitely what we have seen with a number of gang members, and in this case with, people who are under 18 when they commit crimes. Yeah, so his comment is that kids should be treated like kids. And I agree with you. Someone who steals this candy bar, absolutely right. We need to rehabilitate people like that. But when you have done something so horrific, in this case, such as a gang murder with a gun during the course of a robbery, you really need to be held accountable, because otherwise public safety is greatly endangered, as it was in this situation. And as I said, there have been others, who have also gotten essentially the same benefit, who've now gotten out and have murdered again.
And public safety continues to be endangered throughout the Southland. Kathy Katie, thanks for illuminating us on this problem. We appreciate it. President Biden is expected to speak with China's president this week as his own administration admits China's aggression is growing. So does Joe Biden have what it takes to go toe-to-toe with Xi?
And you may remember Dr. Anthony Fauci totally trashed the theory that the coronavirus leaked from a lab in Wuhan, China. But like many other things, he now has a different take on the matter. Listen.
More people saying it doesn't mean there's more evidence of it. Now, we always must, and I'll be very official about this, you keep an open mind to any possibility.
Dean Chang is here to talk about that change.
And fueled by absolutely bone-dry conditions, and temps in that area expected to hover around the 100-degree mark for at least the next 10 days. We're going to speak with a local hotel owner who's housing evacuees later on in our show.
Former Vice President Al Gore is getting heat for comparing people who are skeptical about climate change to the police response to the Uvalde school shooting. Listen.
Climate deniers are really in some ways similar to all of those almost 400 law enforcement officers in Uvalde, Texas, who were waiting outside an unlocked door while the children were being massacred.
Unbelievable. Gore also claiming America's response to climate change is failing to, quote, stop the killing. The Democrats' remarks met with some swift condemnation. An editor from the Daily Caller saying, quote, absolutely disgusting rhetoric comparing the climate to little kids being massacred is absolutely appalling.
Unbelievable. If you want to know what it looks like when somebody becomes a caricature of themselves, see that last story. Meantime, General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, says the Chinese military has become increasingly and noticeably more aggressive toward the U.S. and allies.
The warning comes days before President Biden will meet virtually with Chinese President Xi Jinping, as critics say he's been too soft on the Communist Party. Dean Chang is a senior research fellow with the Heritage Foundation Asian Studies Center. First off, Dean, thanks for being with us this morning. But what are you expecting, or what are you hoping to come out of this meeting with the Chinese president and President Biden that's supposed to happen in the next?
I'm hoping actually that almost nothing comes out of this meeting, because at this point there's not much that we should expect to see from a meeting like this. It's not as though the Chinese are going to be making any concessions, but we have seen President Biden in the past make concessions, such as releasing Meng Wanzhou, the CFO for Huawei, in order to set the stage for the previous virtual meeting.
I mean, I feel like what General Milley said is sort of obvious. I mean, we've been talking about it on this show. We've talked about it with you, Dean, multiple times. What is the United States doing about this increased threat of China that, according to Mark Milley, the government's now aware of?
Well, we are seeing regular transits through the South China Sea and the Taiwan Straits by U.S. Navy vessels. We're also watching the Chinese trail behind them. We're flying aircraft in the area, and we're watching the Chinese behave dangerously around them. General Milley has said that he deliberately called his Chinese counterpart back in the last days of the Trump administration to reassure them. You have to wonder whether or not he's asking the Chinese to reassure him these days as the Chinese act more aggressively, according to his own comments.
And we're going to switch gears here. Dr. Fauci says he's keeping an open mind on the COVID lab leak theory after previously dismissing it. Listen.
More people saying it doesn't mean there's more evidence of it. Now, we always must, and I'll be very official about this, you keep an open mind to any possibility. And I have been of that bent from the very beginning. But if you ask me, and a lot of qualified virologists, they say we have an open mind, but it looks very, very much like this was a natural occurrence.
Mr. Chang, why all of a sudden the change of heart?
That's a good question. I suspect that part of it is the recent revelations from NIH that money did in fact go through EcoHealth Alliance to the Chinese to do investigatory research regarding altering viruses. NIH is very careful about saying that they did not fund gain-of-function research on viruses, but then they very carefully define what they mean when they say gain-of-function. So I suspect that here we are seeing some changes as further details emerge from what NIH did in fact pay money for.
Meantime, staying with China for another topic, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis slamming the Chinese Communist Party for buying giant chunks of farmland and property in his state. Here's the governor.
These companies have ties to the CCP, and it's not always apparent on the face of whatever company is doing. But I think it's a huge problem. Lord, I've signed legislation to crack down on undue influence from rogue states, including the CCP.